And what I'd like to do is to talk about COP27 and climate change and kind of give a perspective at kind of a high level of the issues, and especially in addition to stressing the risk, which everybody stresses and which I stress all the time myself. I was a risk manager. To stress opportunity also, because that's not normally done. And I think this is a key word that will enable more climate action. So I know many of you, some I don't. I've been involved in climate change for a long time. Here are some of the things that you might want to take a look at. And I think that the presentation will be available if you want to have a look. Okay. Can everybody see that? Doris, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I like to give the bottom line up front because otherwise it gets lost in the shuffle. So in terms of risk, the risk of climate change is basically, in one line, disastrous damage to the human race. Depends on the scenarios and so forth, but that's basically what it is. And climate change is already taking lives and homes and damaging infrastructure and costing money, as we know. And it can get much worse. And if we do not increase our action on reducing climate change, it will get much worse. Okay, so that's the risk. There's also opportunity, which is the transition to a renewable economy that has to take place in order for successful mitigation, that is reducing climate change itself. And this is actually the biggest opportunity for a healthier world since the Industrial Revolution, I believe, or the digital revolution. And in order to achieve this, all the estimates that have been done come up with the same basic scale of money that's going to be needed. The scale of money is tens of trillions of dollars in investment, not billions, trillions, tens of trillions of dollars. Okay, so have to keep that in mind. All right, so governments, what do governments actually do and what should they do in order to facilitate the transition to a renewable economy? Well, they have to set policy, reasonable policies, tax policy and so forth. All kinds of policy regulations that individually across countries have to be set and consistent with the political demands and so forth. And they provide some money. So the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, biggest act so far is $500 billion for climate. So it's not tens of trillions of dollars. So governments do not have the tens of trillions of dollars needed to facilitate and implement a renewable energy economy globally in order to mitigate climate change. That's a problem. However, there is one sector globally that does have tens of trillions of dollars. It's the only one. It's private capital, business. So because it takes tens of trillions of dollars to implement a renewable energy economy, that means business must do the heavy lifting to make a transition to a renewable economy facilitated by business, facilitated by government policies and regulations, hopefully that are conducive. So having a government plus business model for transitioning to a renewable energy economy is not only a desirable solution, it's really the only solution that is economically viable that can actually practically achieve what we need. Okay, so I want to emphasize that right up front because it's not often understood, and it's really quite simple when you frame the problem this way. And the COP Climate Conference, the annual climate conference, do play a big role, and that's what I want to talk about in this talk. So Climate action is, of course, urgent. So I like to always have a vision and a mission in mind. The vision is a state, which is to have a livable and just world as far as possible. The mission is to eliminate carbon dioxide emissions, which are causing the problem of global warming, to mitigate climate change. That will enable a livable and just world. If we don't do that, the world won't be livable. So carbon dioxide, are you able to see my cursor, Doris?
Yes.
Okay, so carbon dioxide plus some other gases constitute what are called greenhouse gases, and they lead to global warming. Global warming is the upward trend of temperature within climate change. Okay, so there's both global warming and there's the more general idea of climate change. Okay, and in addition to mitigation, we also need adaptation with resilience as far as possible for what we don't mitigate. So that's the mission, to achieve the vision. So climate change with global warming is actually the most critical issue we face. It actually is a survival issue for the whole human race. The poor, as we all know, suffer the worst and have the least responsibility. So that's the moral issue of it. But there's also a survival issue that we have to highlight in addition to the moral issue. So as we know, loss and damage, which is a compensation from developed countries that are mostly causing the problem to less developed countries. Implementing that is really complicated and is going to be dealt with in COP27. The funding from developed economies to less developed economies is not enough, does not reach the agreed on levels from the Paris Agreement. There is some news, and I just wanted to highlight this. It just came out at Bloomberg, and the funding organizations and something called GFANS have a new program to help the Global South transition to renewables. So that is a positive thing. Okay. So I want to give you a visual sense of what carbon dioxide emissions mean. The weight of carbon dioxide emitted per person per year on the average across the globe is 1 elephant. Okay. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the highest it's been in 3 million years, and the temperature globally on the average is moving out of historical bounds since civilization started. We do not have experience in a world that we are now moving into. So I said climate is a human survival issue. Let me just review what that means. So we've always had disasters, but the disasters on the whole are made worse due to global warming. So a whole bunch of them, I'm just going to read them. Each line is a separate topic that you could talk about a lot. So more crop failures, worse fresh water shortages, sea level rise, ocean acidification, more intense fires, worse extreme heat waves, droughts, flooding, weather, including more intense hurricanes, more disease, more severe species extermination, more political instability and loss of civil rights, more climate migration, increased conflict, that means more wars, national insecurity, and more terrorism. And one which is not stressed enough, but which I believe is extremely important, is possible systemic disruption of economic and financial systems worldwide and possible breakdown of those systems. There are irreversible tipping points, and there are also impacts of one effect on another effect. So there are feedbacks which make both of them worse. Okay. So that's the problem. Climate is now recognized as a top risk in the economics finance community, which is very important. For example, the Davos World Economic Forum, for a long time, climate has been at the top of their risk list. So I want to mention the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure many of you know about, but just in case you don't, here they are. They're goals to which all countries have agreed. All justice issues are tied to climate action, which is goal number 13. So mitigating climate is necessary, although not sufficient, to achieve justice, and that's a big part of climate justice. So I've been talking about the risk, the bad news, but the good news is we can mitigate climate. We really can, with the technology that we have now. New technology will help, but we can mitigate climate effectively with the technology we have now. And the main framework in which to do that is climate change risk management, okay? So again, we have to reduce as far as possible and eliminate carbon dioxide emissions to stop global warming, which are causing all these bad effects. And to do that, we need action at all levels, local to global. We need all of them. So that means governments at the municipal level, state level, national level, and international conferences like the one we're talking about here. It also means businesses. It means individuals that are acting not only to reduce their own carbon footprint, but that are advocating for climate action. And NGOs of all types, that's environmental, faith-based, investors, and academia, and so forth. Okay, so we need action by everybody. It's important to know that there's no silver bullet for what to do. Instead, we need a portfolio of many climate actions, for example, 100. So if you're familiar with drawdown, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I urge you to just Google drawdown and have a look at it, or you can look at the IPCC mitigation reports. So education and motivation is extremely important. That's one of our big problems, is that we don't have enough education about what the risks are for climate and what the opportunities are. Now, there are many reports, there are journals, there are documents, more than you can read, that try to do this. I do want to mention one new journal, the Journal of Climate Action, Research and Policy, that's going to focus on climate action. That's new in the journal space. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's going to start coming out next year. Okay, so we're here to talk about the climate conferences, which is the International UNFCCC climate conference, is the highest level forum for climate negotiations between countries. So notable conferences that have occurred are Copenhagen and Paris. I was actually at both of those. And we're talking now about a COP27, the 27th conference held this year in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, the basic concept are nationally determined contributions that are voluntary by each country about what each country can do and is willing to do, okay? What we need is enhanced ambitions for these national determined contributions, or NDCs, starting now. I would characterize the climate conferences as having had steady but difficult progress. There is a recognition that climate is everybody's problem. And there's less obstruction, but it's not zero, for climate action. And there's less, but not zero, free riding. That means not acting. Okay, so I think everybody knows this, just refreshing, but what are the basic underlying issues? So at a high level, why is there really a problem? Okay, so if the problem is carbon dioxide, now carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere on the average for a scale which is 100 years. It doesn't drop out of the atmosphere in any easy way. So if we look at the annual emissions of carbon dioxide due mostly to burning fossil fuels, and we look at this orange line here, that's China. So China has transitioned from burning less fossil fuels in the 1970s to now being the leading contributor annually. Okay, the United States is second, European Union third, and Russia fourth, and the other countries are less individually, although together they make up a large amount. Okay, but that's not the important thing that we have to look at when we talk about global warming. Why is that? It's because the carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere. So what we have to worry about is the total amount of carbon dioxide, the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide. That's what matters for global warming. It's not the annual amount, it's the total amount. And in that total amount, which is in this graphic, the United States, which is this big box here, contributions are proportional to area here on this graph, is number one. And the United States will remain number one for cumulative carbon dioxide under all of the scenarios with which I'm familiar going forward. So the United States has the most responsibility for global warming, and it's in this graphic. European Union is second, China is third, then Russia, India, and all the other countries, okay? So you have to remember that, it's really important. Another point which is absolutely crucial and which people don't talk about enough is something called the carbon budget. So what is the carbon budget? Well, the more carbon dioxide you put in the atmosphere, the hotter it gets. So if you have as your goal a certain temperature increase due to carbon dioxide and these other gases, and you want to use that as a constraint, then the amount of carbon dioxide you can put in the atmosphere is constrained. That's the carbon budget, okay? And this is a complicated graphic illustrating the carbon budget for certain scenarios. I'm not going to go into the details. You can look at this if you don't already know it. I do want to point out one thing is that these are the data up to now for the temperature as a function of the total carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And you can see that the relation is in fact a linear relation. So that's a visual demonstration that the cumulative carbon dioxide does determine the global temperature. The carbon budget is therefore constrained. So how much is it? How much is the carbon budget? Well, it depends on what temperature you're looking for, but under scenarios which leave the planet livable, we have basically used up practically all the carbon in the carbon budget that we can. What's left is only a small fraction of what we've already used. And now, in terms of negotiations at these conferences, one of the essential issues is, given everything else, what is an equitable, just, and practical way to divide up the carbon budget so we don't get into the situation of having an unlivable world. So in that discussion and these negotiations, energy equity is a huge negotiating issue. So this is the per capita use of greenhouse gases, which is a proxy for energy. And the United States, you can see, is far and away above the average in the world. Okay, Russia and the European Union are also above. China has been below and is increasing, but still, even today, for per capita greenhouse gas, only about half of what the United States has. So this is a huge issue. So these are the issues that underlie the entire negotiating process for COP. And the other issues are basically how to try to cope with these issues. It's also important, I didn't mention, but the amount of carbon dioxide that corresponds to the carbon budget, that's a physics-based number. These are physics-based, so these are physics-based numbers. And this is not something that you can negotiate away or, morally change or anything. It's just physics. It has to do with the rotational energies of molecules and things like that. Okay. So I've been going pretty slowly, but now I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit because I'm going to cover ground that you probably already know. So in the Paris Agreement, to which all countries agreed, the goal was to achieve a well under 2 degrees centigrade rise above pre-industrial levels and a target of 1.5. Now, disasters are much worse at 3 degrees centigrade rise, and at 4 degrees centigrade rise, we have an unlivable planet. So I just want to pause for just a second. These are not big numbers. 1.5, 2, 3, 4. Why is it such a big problem? we know that from daytime to nighttime, the temperature can change even more than this. From summer to winter, the temperature changes. So why is it that we're talking about these small numbers? The reason is when it's night at one place, it's day somewhere else. If it's summer in one place, it's winter somewhere else. So those temperature changes give fluctuations, but they're not Earth-wide. These numbers are for the entire Earth. Globally, the temperature increases, and the Earth is so big that the effects that these temperature increases produce is really huge. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, so where are we? So at the last conference in Glasgow, NDCs were made better than they were at Paris. And so if all pledges are carried out, then estimates are that you can achieve somewhere around a 2 degrees centigrade increase. Well, that's better than 3 degrees, which is what was at Paris, but it's not enough for 1.5 degrees. Okay, so that's where we are. I just want to illustrate that really quickly. So this graph is pre-Glasgow, but it gives the idea. So if the NDCs are achieved, then all the developing countries actually on an annual basis contribute more than the developed countries. But I remind you that what's really important is the cumulative amount. But anyway, that's just a fact of what the NDCs will produce. What we need is that all countries have to markedly decrease carbon dioxide emissions by 2050 to achieve a 2 degree centigrade world. Okay, that includes other developing countries, China, the US, India, everybody has to do it. It's physics based. It has nothing to do with politics. And if we want a 1.5 degree world, we need urgent speed up now. Okay, with basically carbon dioxide emissions basically being reduced to near zero by 2050. Okay, I want to mention something which is normally glossed over, but it is really critical. And that is dangerous climate science denial and climate risk denial of global warming. So first of all, so what are the various flavors? There exist in 4 what I call tranches. So first is global warming does exist. Some deniers deny that. Global warming is in fact caused by humans since about 1975. Some deniers deny that. Global warming has huge impacts that are getting worse and will get much worse if we don't act more. Many deniers deny that that is true. And global warming can, in fact, be mitigated. And many deniers deny that. Okay, so you have this class of people that deny one or more of these facts, basically, and that's a huge risk. Climate action is actually being obstructed by climate science and risk deniers globally. In the United States, it's basically one of the 2 parties, you know what I'm talking about, but there are climate deniers actually around the globe, everywhere, and basically they operate with disinformation and so forth, which is a completely different, another story, which I could tell if people want to ask me questions about it. But this is something we have to face, everybody. Okay, so that's it. I just want to end the talk with opportunity and risk management with 3 words. So when they're rearranged from the way I usually give them, it's spelled COP, right? So you can remember it. So the first is courage. So Doris talked about in her prayer at the beginning, she talked about courage. Well, we need courage because every single thing that we do is really difficult. There are all kinds of difficulties involved with technical difficulties, policy difficulties, and the obstruction difficulties that I've talked about before. We need courage in order to go forward and deal with these. Optimism. So people ask me, Jen, are you optimistic about climate change? And my response to that is, I don't have a choice. Okay. So when my grandchildren get to be old enough so they ask me, hey, Grandpa, what'd you do about climate change? I'm not going to say I gave up and quit. I'm not going to do that, because if you quit, you lose. So there's no other choice. Okay. You can have viewpoints about this and that scenario, but you have to stay optimistic. Otherwise we just lose. And the third, the P is for persistence. So the persistence in action has to take place, increase now and going forward, probably on a continuous basis for many, many years, if not basically forever. It's not a sprint, won't be solved in a month or a year. And we can all help, and we all should help. So, and I'm sure the people on this call are actually doing that. So basic idea is look for climate action opportunity, apply climate risk management, speak up and act, and using these three attributes. And if you're already acting, then thank you.